Imagine discovering that your father isn't a hero, but a malevolent force of nature waiting to conquer your world. Mark Grayson doesn't just face a villain in Invincible, he faces the brutal deconstruction of everything a son should believe in. This is how Invincible uses the character of Omni-Man or Nolan to redefine fatherhood in TV forever. At first, we are introduced to the perfect superhero dad. Nolan Grayson feels familiar. He's calm, wise, slightly distant, but still loving in a traditional superhero father kind of way. He gives Mark guidance about powers, responsibility, and adulthood. You know, all the classic stuff we've seen in comics. He feels like a more grounded version of the classic Superman archetype. That warmth matters, because Invincible spends time convincing us, the audience, that Nolan is safe. Not perfect, but safe. The show carefully builds domestic comfort around him. Family dinners, casual conversations, father-son flying lessons, Nolan helping Mark understand what it truly means to be a hero. Even Debbie's trust reinforces the illusion. Their marriage feels real. Nolan isn't framed like the ticking time bomb that he is. He's framed like stability. And that's the perfect trap set by the writers. You see, the genius of Omni-Man's writing is that his fake warmth never feels fake on first viewing. When Nolan smiled at Mark, we used to believe him. We used to believe in that happiness, that it was just a normal father-son relationship. But after the reveal that Omni-Man is evil, every earlier interaction becomes contaminated. We can't help but have the thought in the back of our minds that Nolan is treating Earth like a temporary assignment. Of course, all of this happens in Season 1. And something else that happens in Season 1, which redefined fatherhood, was the train scene. The subway massacre isn't shocking simply because it's violent. It's shocking because Nolan forces Mark to experience violence as a lesson. That's the horror. Omni-Man doesn't just beat his son, he educates him through trauma and weaponizes that paternal authority. Every word during that fight sounds like a twisted version of fatherly guidance. This is reality. This is what weakness creates. Think, Mark, think. And it's through Mark's suffering that fatherhood is completely redefined in superhero television. Usually fathers in these stories are absent, inspirational, or morally complicated. And by the end of Season 1, Omni-Man isn't simply a villain, but a psychological scar. And that's going to be important for much later on. One of the smartest things Invincible does after Season 1 is remove Nolan from the equation. Most shows would immediately rush towards a revenge or reconciliation arc, but instead, Nolan becomes an absence, and absences can haunt people more than villains ever could. You feel Nolan everywhere, even when he isn't on screen. Mark fully can't trust himself, Debbie can barely function, and the world no longer believes in superheroes and that they're inherently good. Omni-Man leaves behind emotional radiation. The horrifying act of betrayal that he committed is felt by the entire world, but more importantly, Debbie. You see, Mark thinks of Nolan as his enemy. From this point on, he'll do everything in his power to make everyone and himself believe that he's nothing like his father. But with Debbie, every object in the house is a reminder of Nolan. She isn't mourning a death, she's mourning the realization that the life she trusted may have never been real, and that emotional collapse just grounds the series in Season 2. Then the show flips the script again. When they reunite on Thraxa, Mark's anger boils over, but he's forced to confront Nolan's genuine remorse. Discovering Nolan's new Thraxan family, a wife and a new baby, adds a heavy layer of complicated emotions to their dynamic. Because for the first time in his life, Nolan developed attachments stronger than the ideology that was drilled into him at a young age, and that realization breaks him. And then when Nolan admits that he misses Debbie, that scene changes the entire character, because it confirms the central tragedy of Omni-Man. He became capable of genuine love too late. For all his strength, Nolan fundamentally lacks emotional maturity, and that's not entirely his fault. Most of that is due to where he grew up, on Viltrum. And the saddest part of all is that he has to live with what that ignorance destroyed. A broken family and next to no trust. Now let's move on to the hardest part of this entire journey. Redemption. We're all familiar with Oliver, but Oliver changes Nolan in a way Mark never could, because Oliver is vulnerable, he's young, impressionable, and now Nolan faces the exact same responsibility that he failed with Mark. He has to teach a child what strength means, but this time he hesitates. The old Nolan would have molded Oliver into a perfect Viltrumite weapon, but the newer Nolan begins questioning the ideology itself. Not because he suddenly rejects the idea of power and strength, but because he finally understands what power does to families, and more importantly, what chasing power does to families. It's in season 4 that we see Oliver and Nolan start coming together and treating each other like a real father and son. Of course, at the beginning it's a little rocky, but the more time they spend with each other, the more they realize they actually love this dynamic. And so with Nolan regaining the trust of both of his sons and attempting to regain the trust of his wife, season 4 builds back Omni-Man as a new person. I mean, before Invincible, most television fathers fell into recognizable categories. We had the noble mentor, the absent protector, the emotionally distant authority figure, or the tragic sacrifice. Omni-Man shattered all of them. He made his own category. And he transformed fatherhood into a psychological horror, then somehow transformed that horror into guilt, emotional evolution, and then eventually redemption. But what I really love about this show is how Nolan isn't just the guy who betrayed his son. The series forces him to keep living afterward. He has to carry that weight, to face the family he destroyed and learn emotions that he probably should have learned centuries ago. Through Mark, Oliver and Debbie, Invincible asks one brutal question over and over. Can someone who failed their family this completely ever truly change? The show never gives an easy answer, and that's exactly why it works. And is one of the reasons why Omni-Man is written as probably the best fatherhood figure in the history of TV. Now, that last part was just my opinion, but I would like to thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully you can subscribe, because most people say I'm underrated, and I think I'm kind of underrated. Road to 5,000 subscribers. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.